In 2012, the world was introduced to a shy, soft-spoken teenager who walked onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent with trembling hands and eyes filled with fear. Within minutes, Jonathan Antoine silenced every doubter in the room with a voice so powerful, so emotionally charged, it sent shivers down millions of spines. The performance went viral. He became an overnight sensation. But then, something strange happened. Just as quickly as he rose to fame, Jonathan seemed to disappear. No scandals, no tabloid meltdowns. He simply faded from the public eye. So, what really happened to him? Was it the pressure? Was it heartbreak? Or was there something deeper going on behind the scenes? Today, we uncover the real story behind Jonathan Antoine, the pain he hid, the battles he fought, and the remarkable transformation that turned his silence into one of the most powerful comebacks in modern music. When Jonathan Antoine first stepped on stage in 2012, no one expected what was about to happen. Wearing a baggy suit, weighed down by nerves and barely speaking above a whisper, he didn't look like someone destined for stardom. Even Simon Cowell seemed skeptical. But then, he opened his mouth. Standing beside his duet partner, Charlotte Giaconelli, Jonathan delivered a rendition of The Prayer that instantly made jaws drop. The power, the richness, the raw emotion. His voice didn't just impress, it stunned. The crowd was on its feet. Amanda Holden was wiping away tears. Simon, he was floored. By the time the audition clip hit YouTube, it had already exploded. Overnight, Jonathan became a global name. In the days that followed, interviews poured in. Headlines hailed him as the new Pavarotti. But beneath the praise was a young man still struggling with the same insecurities that haunted him long before the spotlight. Simon Cowell later admitted he considered separating the duo, believing Jonathan had the star potential to go solo. But Jonathan refused to leave Charlotte behind, showing a loyalty that fans instantly respected. Still, fame was knocking louder than ever, and it didn't care whether he was ready. To the outside world, Jonathan Antoine was a dream come true, a once-in-a-generation voice discovered at just 17, living every aspiring singer's fantasy. But behind that fairy tale facade was a young man wrestling with demons that no spotlight could ever cure. Jonathan had been struggling long before the world ever knew his name. As a child, he was painfully shy, often described as soft-spoken and gentle. But his demeanor, coupled with his larger frame, made him an easy target for bullies. School wasn't a place of inspiration or belonging. It was a battlefield. He was teased relentlessly, called names, ridiculed for his appearance, and even mocked for his love of classical music, which many of his peers didn't understand or appreciate. Those experiences didn't just shake his confidence, they shattered it. Over time, Jonathan developed severe social anxiety. He became withdrawn, often avoiding eye contact, and even simple conversations were exhausting. Music became his escape, the only place where he felt truly seen and heard. But that deep love for music also became tied to overwhelming emotions, grief, loneliness, fear, and would later play a complicated role in his relationship with fame. When Britain's Got Talent came along, it offered an opportunity for him to share his voice with the world. But it also thrust him into an environment filled with pressure, expectations, and a level of exposure he wasn't remotely prepared for. The moment the audition aired, Jonathan's life changed overnight. Suddenly, he was no longer anonymous. Strangers knew his name, his face, his story. Interviews, red carpets, and TV appearances became the new normal. On the surface, he seemed to be handling it all with grace. But behind the scenes, Jonathan was spiraling. He began experiencing intense panic attacks, sometimes just moments before going on stage. His heart would race uncontrollably, his breath would shorten, and he'd feel as if the walls were closing in. He once confessed in an interview that, even during performances, there were times he was barely holding it together, performing not out of joy, but out of sheer obligation and fear of letting people down. The constant comparison to other artists, the pressure to always appear happy, the fear of failure, it was suffocating. Fame had amplified his insecurities instead of silencing them. Social media, which was supposed to be a tool for connection, became a minefield of criticism. While many fans adored him, others were cruel, picking apart his weight, his style, his speech, and questioning whether he even belonged in the spotlight. And then there was the imposter syndrome. Despite the accolades, Jonathan often felt like a fraud. He couldn't reconcile the image of the opera prodigy the media portrayed with the scared, anxious boy he still saw in the mirror. At times, he would listen back to his own performances and feel like it was someone else singing. Someone braver, stronger, and more confident than he actually felt. That dissonance wore on him, even as he stood on stages in front of thousands. There were nights Jonathan would cry himself to sleep, haunted by the voice in his head that told him he wasn't good enough, that the world would eventually see through him, that it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. He found it difficult to talk about these feelings. In the entertainment industry, vulnerability is often seen as weakness, and as a man, particularly a rising star in the classical world, the expectation was to remain composed, strong, and polished. But Jonathan was anything but. His emotions were raw and real, and he didn't yet have the tools to manage them. Charlotte Giaconelli, his duet partner, became one of the only people who truly understood what he was going through. The two had met as classmates at the West, Hatch High School, and had bonded over music, performance, and a shared sense of not fitting in. On stage, their voices blended perfectly, but off stage, it was their emotional support for each other that kept them going. Charlotte often stepped in during interviews when Jonathan froze. She helped him handle press junkets, calmed him backstage before performances, and offered him a safe space when things felt overwhelming. Their friendship was built on mutual trust, and during the chaos of sudden stardom, she was his rock. But even with Charlotte by his side, Jonathan's mental health was deteriorating. He began withdrawing between performances, often avoiding public appearances unless absolutely necessary. He stopped taking calls, ignored texts from friends, and spent long periods isolated in his room. He'd play music for hours, not to practice, but to cope. In darker moments, Jonathan admitted that he had suicidal thoughts. He never acted on them, but they lingered, especially during moments when the pressure became too much. He felt trapped between the person the world expected him to be and the fragile young man he actually was. Adding to this was his complicated relationship with body image. Jonathan had always struggled with his weight, and the sudden media attention only magnified his discomfort. Tabloids often focused on his appearance instead of his talent. Comments online would weaponize his size against him, reducing his incredible voice to a surprise coming from someone like him. Even well-meaning fans would sometimes say, "I didn't expect that voice from someone who looks like you," unintentionally reinforcing the idea that he didn't fit the mold of a typical star. Those microaggressions hurt more than people realized. Jonathan became hyper-aware of how he looked in every photo, every video. He hated seeing himself on screen and dreaded promotional shoots. The person he saw looking back at him felt foreign, wrong, like an imposter wearing his own skin. At one point, Jonathan considered quitting music altogether. He feared that if he continued, the fame would completely consume him, or worse, break him beyond repair. But something inside him held on. It wasn't stubbornness. It was a quiet, desperate hope that somewhere beyond the noise and pressure, there was still a place for him, still a future worth singing for. He didn't know it at the time, but the road to healing had already begun. It would be long, painful, and winding, but it would also be the journey that defined him. After their stunning success on BGT, Jonathan and Charlotte signed a $1 million record deal with Simon Cowell's label. Their debut album soared to the top of the charts. But tensions were bubbling beneath the surface. While Charlotte leaned toward musical theater and pop, Jonathan felt pulled toward the classical and operatic roots that had first inspired him. Their artistic visions began to diverge, and while the media played up the best friends forever angle, privately, the split was already happening. By 2014, it became official. Jonathan and Charlotte were going solo. The announcement shocked fans, many of whom thought the duo would last for years. But the truth was, both needed to grow in their own directions. The split was amicable, at least publicly. But for Jonathan, It was a painful loss. Charlotte had been his anchor during the storm. Now he was alone. And as he embarked on his solo journey, the weight of expectations returned heavier than ever. In October 2014, Jonathan released Tenor, his first solo album. It was a critical success. Critics praised the maturity of his voice, the depth of his performance, and the haunting beauty of his interpretations. Yet oddly, the album didn't receive the promotion it deserved. Then came Believe in 2016. This album marked a shift, darker tones, deeper expression. It was Jonathan coming into his own, finally free to choose his path. But something was off. Tour dates were canceled. Social media went quiet. Appearances grew rare. Fans began to notice. Jonathan was vanishing. Speculation grew. Was he retiring? Was he sick? Had the fame simply overwhelmed him? Behind the scenes, the truth was far more complex and heartbreaking. What the world didn't know was that Jonathan had reached a breaking point. The years of self-doubt, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion had finally caught up with him. The spotlight, that once gave him validation, now felt like a prison. He couldn't keep pretending to be okay. He retreated completely. No press, no new music, no updates. At one point, even those close to him weren't sure where he was or how he was doing. Privately, Jonathan was going through a period of deep depression. He had gained more weight, struggled with binge eating, and at times felt completely lost. He turned away from industry contacts, deleted social apps, and withdrew from public life. The boy with the golden voice was gone, and no one knew if he'd ever return. But then, quietly, slowly, something shifted. Jonathan began rebuilding himself, not for fame, but for survival. He sought therapy, started journaling, and reconnected with the part of himself that loved music, not the industry. He lost a significant amount of weight, not because of pressure, but because he finally wanted to feel better. He worked with new vocal coaches who helped him refine his voice as it matured. In 2018, he released a video update. He looked different, more confident, more at peace. He spoke about mental health, self-worth, and the importance of taking time away. Fans were stunned and inspired. More importantly, Jonathan was no longer hiding. He was healing. His comeback didn't arrive with flashy headlines or viral clips. It came with quiet power. Jonathan returned to the stage on his terms, performing in smaller venues, collaborating with fellow classical artists, and releasing music independently. His voice had deepened, richer, bolder, more commanding. But it wasn't just the voice that had changed. It was Jonathan himself. He was now a man with scars and strength. A survivor of the fame machine who had walked away only to return more, whole than ever before. He began posting more frequently, interacting with fans, sharing moments from his life, not as a polished product, but as a real person. And slowly, the world started paying attention again. Today, Jonathan Antoine lives a quieter, more grounded life. He splits his time between recording sessions, local performances, and mental health advocacy. He's no longer chasing charts or chasing approval. He's chasing purpose. He has hinted at a new album, one that blends his classical roots with contemporary emotion. He's also reportedly working on a documentary that explores the toll of early fame and the pressure to be perfect in an industry that rarely shows compassion. He's found joy in simplicity, gardening, cooking, walking his dog. He has openly said that success no longer means numbers, it means peace. And for his fans, that's the greatest victory of all. Jonathan Antoine's story isn't just about a boy with a beautiful voice. It's about survival, it's about trauma, healing, and the courage to disappear in order to truly find oneself. He didn't fall from fame, he escaped it. And in doing so, he uncovered something far more valuable than applause: self-worth. So, the next time you listen to Jonathan sing, don't just hear the voice. Hear the story behind it, the pain, the courage, the silence, and the strength it took to return. Because sometimes the greatest comeback isn't to the stage, it's to yourself.